defending America from political Islam, China, Russia, pandemics, and racial strife. Kenneth is he's an analyst. He's a businessman. He's an author. Kenneth, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Pleasure to be with you today.
So, Kenneth, you say, I think quite interestingly, that in order to understand the nature of the threat that we are under, both internationally and domestically, we need to define the nature of that threat. And you do that job very well. But in a nutshell, could you describe, firstly, what we are facing internationally, and then we'll take a look at our domestic society?
Okay, great. As we'll end up discussing, the foreign and domestic are interrelated. The bad guys that we're confronting abroad also have mechanisms to attack us in the U.S.
Indeed.
So the three bad guys or groups of bad guys that I monitor are, I color code them, the reds, the greens, and the blues. Reds are a traditional color for communists. That's China, Russia, and their friends. The green is traditional color for Islam, but I'm particularly looking at Islamists. In other words, countries that want to impose Islam on somebody else. That would be Iran and Qatar. And then the blues, traditional color for the United Nations color, those are the globalists. That would be the UN, World Economic Forum, the drug cartels, for example. So those three groups of bad guys we're confronting outside of America, but we're also confronting inside America.
Yes, and I think that it goes to really understanding who we are historically as a way to understand where we came from and who we are or who we should be today. And that is a rejection of the political and philosophical agenda of all three of those categories. We stand for limited government in this country. We stand for rights emanating from God and not from the state, as articulated by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. He said we're endowed by our Creator. By that he meant God. And then he listed various rights that emanate from that. The concept of natural rights and natural law comes from both the Bible and it comes from English philosophy. And I think that if we can get to understanding that and why that's worth preserving and fighting for, then we're going to be in a position where we can confront and at least keep at bay these three horsemen that you talked about.
Yes, exactly. Now, continuing with your discussion of the Declaration of Independence, my favorite line in the Declaration of Independence is that the government's responsible for protecting our life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right?
Indeed.
Now, we, what I call normal people, we believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 100% of the people because we're all endowed with these rights, as you mentioned, from our Creator. The bad guys, the reds, the greens, and the blues, believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 10% of the people. Me, my family, my friends, but not for the other 90% of the people. That's, to me, the conflict that we're fighting, and I call it World War III. It's actually been going on a long time. You can call it World War I. It's just human nature that since the beginning of mankind, are we going to be governed by us, or as we say in America, we the people, or are we going to be governed by they, the elites? And that tension has been with human beings forever. That's why I call it World War I. But since somebody already numbered World War I and II, I have no choice but to call it World War III.
No, I mean, I think you make the point. It goes back to antiquity. It goes back, I mean, the great writer Whittaker Chambers, who was a communist in the 1930s and who basically blew the whistle on the communist infiltration of the FDR administration and the great trial of the century between himself and Alger Hiss, who was Assistant Secretary of State and whom he named. He wrote the book Witness, where he talks about in the first chapter in his letter to his children that man, is dealing with the world's second oldest religion. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. You may look at that literally or metaphorically, but either way, the idea was that by partaking of the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve sought to overthrow God. They sought to create an earthly control, an earthly utopia. to replace the supernatural with the natural. And that's why they were banished from the Garden of Eden. That was the birth of communism, as it has been called. It goes by various names. It switches names, it seems, every generation. But every generation we deal with this grand conspiracy by men to try to rule the world because they believe that they're enlightened and that they are elite. And that America, the founding of this republic, was an anomaly. This was it's almost a miracle that it was an awareness of that side of our nature, which realizes that we are not God, that we're imperfect men, and that we need to set up a system by which we can protect our rights and progress in the real sense, as opposed to surrender our rights to this elite, which is trying to replace God.
Very, very good analysis. Congratulations. The Reds, the Greens, and the Blues, by the way, are all unelected. They're all authoritarian.
Right.
They all hate the rule of law because they want to write the law. They hate the 10 Commandments. They hate God, and they hate us. And I have an affectionate name for them. To summarize the Reds, the Greens, the Blues, they're the pagans. They're the pagans that we've been fighting since the beginning of mankind, and they came back. So I'm working on an article called Revenge of the Pagans to discuss this issue.
Well, I mean, paganism is right. I mean, it's, the entire Torah talks about the battle between the belief in God and paganism or idol worship, which is not necessarily only a graven image, but it's a whole idea, because the pagan idol is something that's controlled by people. It's not divine. It's not immutable. I mean, it's controlled behind the scenes by people who since it's not real, they put things in its mouth. I mean, they create this image that can be worshipped, and then they decide how they're going to manipulate it in a way that makes us do things, or they tell us what we're seeing, they tell us what we're thinking, as opposed to inherently knowing who we are by knowing God to an extent that it's possible. And that's the crisis that we're in. We're dealing with. I want to address each one of your color scheme because I think each one is worthy of addressing. But I want to talk first about the elites that you're talking about that are threatening us now. That being the sort of international-oriented, illuminated Anglo-Saxon elitists who seek to informally rule the world by controlling, the high ground of culture, the high ground of economy. This is, as you say, the classic open representation is the World Economic Forum. I think it's a success that Klaus Schwab had to resign recently, but they talked about manipulating the world in a way to create this informal, unelected world body that would control and keep in place the trappings of sovereignty, mainly as a formality, but that they would actually control the world. How far along are they? I mean, where are they now? And what can we do to stop them?
Well, they're pretty far along. Helping the World Economic Forum is the corporate world. Now, I come out of the corporate world, and I have a very high respect for businesses. And I think businesses are the right way to manage organizations. That businesses are half democracy, half dictatorships, as opposed to democracies that can't make decisions and dictatorships that are out of control making decisions.
Right.
And so I love corporations, but when corporations get involved in politics, like, for example, the social media companies, and then they decide that they know what the truth is and they know what information is, and they can accuse me or you or others of disinformation. Well, who gave them that right? I didn't see that in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, that we have freedom of speech subject to social media deciding what our freedom of speech is. And so it's very disturbing. So I would say they're in the seventh inning of taking over the world. And by the way, it's a coalition government. Think of the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues as a coalition government.
Mm-hmm.
and they all want to take over the world. By the way, they never say this, but after the Reds or the Greens or the Blues take over the world, they're going to get rid of the Reds or the Greens or the Blues, whoever it is.
Oh, they'll be the first ones to be sent out, marched out, and then shot,
Right,
which has always happened whenever
right,
they come to power. And
right.
but as far as American corporations go, what happened to them? I mean, the idea is that they are checked and balanced by competition, that there is civic regulation that's in place, usually more locally, and that it may include environmental regulation and other policies that protect the individual and protect the community. How is it that they were able to circumvent all of that? Who are they, and why is it that they've become these behemoths on the global stage? I mean, you mentioned social media. We know that in 2017, after the election of Donald Trump, which was not supposed to happen, they got together and tried to figure out what to do to stop that from happening again. And they basically began to algorithm people who were in dissent. I mean, this is an idea that was developed by Jack Dorsey over at Twitter, and to outright ban sites that starting in 2018, when I had my YouTube channel banned. And you couldn't really know what you did or said that would lead to that. How is it that what happened to them that they became so corrupted in that way, and they went into this collusions with government to that degree?
In one word, China. Uh, Pretend you're managing a worldwide business, and you're growing respectably, let's just say 5%, but in China you're growing 30%. And
Mm-hmm.
now all of a sudden, China's a larger and larger percentage of your revenue and earnings. And the Wall Street analyst, someone like myself in my younger day, is saying, Mr. President, can you grow faster? And he goes, yes, I'm going to spend more money in China. We're going to become such a big opportunity. There's so many people there. And then the Chinese government says, oh, Mr. Corporate America, you want to operate in China? Great. Here's the rules. And you have to suppress freedom of speech of red-blooded Americans who believe in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. And they go, oh, well, I need the growth. So, okay, I'm going to listen to you. So China has a very negative influence on corporate America. Look at Hollywood. I'm told they derive half of their revenue or so from China. And so then the Chinese say, well, censor this and censor that. Don't say this and don't say that. They go, oh, yeah, okay, fine, because we want to do business in China. So I'd say China's a big corrupting influence.
I totally agree. The book is The Multifront War, Defending America from Political Islam, China, Russia, Pandemics, and Racial Strife. Kenneth Abramowitz is my guest. Kenneth, I would also note that in addition to China's censorship, they've developed this concept of a social score, which once everyone in the country has some kind of a cell phone or some structure, they then get graded on whether or not they are politically correct according to the government. And if their social score is too low, they may not eat. They may not be able to go to another community. They're basically under a quasi house arrest. Whereas if your social score is high and you're a member of the party and you're one of the beautiful people, you have unlimited wealth. I mean, to the point where, you would make a regular American wealthy person blush. And that this system has been imported all over the world. I think that BlackRock, for example, has put in place the EKG scores. I think, what is it? Environment, Government, and Social Score, ESG. Yeah. And they're judging businesses that they invest in based on their scores in all of those three areas, regardless of whether or not the business is viable. I mean, I'm interested in whether a business is creating something or making money or developing a new product or a new idea, not how many blacks they have on the payroll. I mean, I think that's fine and important. But if you're going to start to judge people based on how many women they have in high office, or whether or not they're observing wind farms or whatever, then you're going to end up putting investment into companies that are going to lose money. That's going to hurt people. And also that whole subjective criterion of judging businesses, it doesn't really tell the whole story. And I think that it needs to be understood, because this concept eventually, just like in China, is probably going to go to every single person, that we're also going to get scores, and that we're also going to be, it's already happening in terms of banks canceling people's bank accounts because they don't fit a certain score. I mean, I know this happened in England, but Nigel Farage, a member of the parliament, was canceled. His entire bank account was pulled because I guess he was not politically correct. It's happening certainly in Canada already. They did this to the truckers who were protesting the biometric, card for whether or not they got the COVID shot. So it's coming. They're pushing for that. What do you think?
Well, it's another one of the negative influences of China. Okay, China's a modern, sophisticated police state, and they're using all the techniques that they or other people created to do everything that you said they're doing. And so they try to get, their theory is 90% of the people will follow orders under huge duress, 10% of the people will complain, and we'll put them in jail, or we'll drive them out of the country.
Right.
But at least we'll get the other 90% to be sheep. And now their counterparts in America, the authoritarians, the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues, are taking some of China's ideas, bringing them to America to try to play the same game on Americans and try to scare 90% of Americans to shut up and be sheep, and then deal harshly with the other 10%. So we're in the crosshairs of this technological innovation, which is being used by the bad guys to go after the good guys. And so this election coming up November 5th is really a referendum. People don't look at it this way, but it's a referendum. Are we going to be a country of we the people, or they the elites? Are we going to be a country of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for everybody, or life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 10% of the people? This is as big a watershed year or date that you get in your lifetime.
Oh, it's clearly the most important election in American history and in world history in a way. I mean, it's really the last chance to set a marker for freedom. And the question really before us is whether or not this elite is gasping its last death breath, or if it's about to be completely and utterly enthroned for eternity. The issue of censorship, I actually feel encouraged over the fact that after the false flag of January 6th, they shut down President Trump's Twitter account, where he had something like 30 million followers, and they shut down Parler at the time, which was growing as a competition, and probably thousands of other accounts. But it didn't work because you had competition arise. I mean, I'm doing very well, for example, on Rumble, and there's Getter and Gab and Truth and all these other sites that are growing. Yes, it's not anywhere near the numbers of Google and YouTube, but it's still moving along, and we still have the means by which to engage in free speech in this country. And I don't think they expected that. I think they expected complete control when they installed their puppet regime, frankly, on January 20th, but they didn't get it. And now we're in a position where we can challenge and dissent, and do so with fear of what we're confronting. I mean, I believe they've turned the FBI into a virtual Gestapo, but yet we can still take action as free citizens. And I think that we are doing so.
Well, there was a movie about 40 years ago, maybe some of your listeners will remember, called Network. And in this movie, the announcer was at a television network, had a fight with his boss, doesn't matter why. And he got so angry, he went to his window in Manhattan, if you remember that, opens up the window and says, "I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." Yes. Well, the American public is basically becoming as mad as hell, just like in that movie, which was a comedy, but now it's serious. And so, as the American people, as we the people, get as mad as hell, that should be reflected on November 5th. And so that the moment of truth is only a few months away.
Indeed. And you talk about the green element of your color code, that being the radical Islamic element. That's not the sort of more moderate Islam, but that is the Islam that is getting a very commanding position in Europe right now, due to millions of immigrants who have created their own spaces in Europe and who are not agreeing to assimilate into European culture. I don't think that's happened in America, at least not yet. And also the attack in Israel by Hamas, which received its funding from Iran, which received its funding from this administration, which basically unleashed the finances that had been frozen as far back as Jimmy Carter. You have then the October 6th invasion of Israel, where thousands of people were slaughtered. And yet you see the international elite, including even the Jewish element of the international elite, siding with the Hamas side of the equation in this country, at elite colleges, in this administration, and that they're stabbing Israel in the back. So where are we in terms of understanding the nature of this threat to freedom in the world?
We're not doing very well.
Yeah.
When you look at the Greens, there's two worldwide terror organizations, but they're different. There's Iran and its friends, which I call a physical terror organization. They just plain want to kill everybody, Jews first, and then the Christians and the Hindus.
Yeah.
And then there's Qatar, which is financing the Muslim Brotherhood, which I call a cultural terror organization. They just want to create new rules for Muslims. Well, they already have the rules, but impose those rules on Christians and Jews and Hindus. So I call that cultural terrorism as opposed to physical terror. But in any case, those two terror organizations are out of control, and they have to be brought under control. And as you mentioned, America is in effect financing Iran and Qatar, as is China and Russia. So America is not playing its traditional role of being the good guy. America is conflicted. America, in the morning, it's a good guy, and in the afternoon, it's a bad guy. That's no way to run a country, and it sends mixed signals to the enemies. And so we have to be a good guy in the morning and in the afternoon. And so we've got to curb the power of Qatar and Iran, who both, by the way, were financing Hamas, which is a professional death cult. And so in a normal world, every single government would be, every single normal government, every single democracy would be sending thank you letters, assuming governments send thank you letters to Israel. Thank you for defeating Hamas. Thank you for defeating this death cult. Thank you for taking on Iran. Because you're doing us a big favor by fighting the bad guys there, so we don't have to fight the bad guys here in my country, wherever that is. And
Right.
So it shows you how upside down the world is to not appreciate what Israel's doing for them.
You know, you mentioned Qatar. I think it recently came out that Qatar is the main funder of American elite colleges. And so there's a connection between that and this shift toward the Hamas point of view by elite students, including Jewish students, some of them anyways. But yet I think that a lot of America woke up shocked by this the day after that attack, when even before the attack was defeated, they had already at Harvard signed a letter blaming Israel for the attack. And that includes liberals and Jews that I know in my own circle who were shocked and appalled by this. What is happening here? In this country, that you now have people who are calling for the complete destruction of Israel, from the river to the sea, and that they are, numbers that are really surprising and unprecedented. What's going on?
Well, remember the first comment I made in the very beginning of our discussion was that the bad guys abroad are the same bad guys here. So, for example, in World War I and World War II, the bad guys were over there, Japan, Germany. Now the bad guys are here, there, and everywhere. That's what I'm calling in World War III. So, Qatar and Iran, through their agents in America, are paying what's called useful idiots to walk around on 200 campuses claiming that they're fighting for Palestine. Hamas, by the way, Iran and Qatar, the two Muslim terror organizations, they don't care about Palestinians. They hate Palestinians.
Right.
They're death cults. So they just want to take over the world, and everyone is in their way. So what they do,
especially Israel. But anyway, yeah.
Well, Israel's in the way because it's 80% Jewish, and then America's in the way. It's 90% Christian. So that's why Iran government or criminals always say death to America, death to Israel, because Israel's in the way short term, America's in the way long term. And so what they do, I saw an article that at Columbia, where I went as an undergraduate, I'm sad to say, something like a third of the people arrested or detained were paid professional protesters. They weren't even students. And then the other 2/3 or so were just useful idiots. They just were sucked in to this the glamour. I don't know why it's glamorous to say I believe in death cults. And I don't get that. But anyways, they were sucked in, probably due to their anti-Semitism and irrational anti-Semitism. So it's a very sad day. Our culture is really failing us. And by the way, the mayors are failing, the governors are failing, the president's failing. We have a systemic failure in this country to protect life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 100% of the people. You know, it sounds simple. Now do it. And our government has let us down.
No, clearly. I mean, this national administration clearly has, in terms of swinging open the border to almost 10 million people without any vetting, spending trillions of dollars, which now cost $15 to get a McDonald's hamburger for working people. And the world is we feel like the world is on the brink of World War III. I mean, and I'm talking kinetic war, not just ideological war. It's just a very, very frightening time and a very unstable time. As far as the college campus people, I mean, it's the same knuckleheads that came out for the Pussy Hat rallies and the Kristallnacht against black businesses and black neighborhoods after the death of George Floyd. I mean, this is just an ongoing, mindless, irrational attack on Americans who are trying to conduct their lives. I mean, it's a very, I don't know what's the philosophy behind it. I know people who are involved in it, frankly. I mean, and they don't know really why. I mean, if you ask them, you know, they can't coherently discuss it. It's almost like a brainwashed situation.
Also known as child abuse. Okay, it's you see, when you have child abuse in the K through 12, and then kids get older and they go to college, it's college child abuse or young adult child abuse, and so it starts earlier than college. Okay, and the communists, the Reds, particularly Russia, through the KGB, have infiltrated our K through 12 schools and our universities for the last 50 years, and we're paying the price for allowing those communists to infiltrate our schools.
What do you think is the role of certain like websites, like for example TikTok and others? I mean, I think that TikTok has played a pretty major role, for example, back many years ago in the development of the so-called QAnon conspiracy theories. Now I think that they've played a major role in the sex change operations, especially focusing on young girls. You know, this is getting their, you know, genitals mutilated at hospitals at a minor age, something that I hope they won't do. And down the road, they'll change their mind. I think they will, but hopefully when it's not too late. And yet this is a major movement with a lot of money involved in hospitals and huge in a huge industry. What do you think that TikTok has anything to do with that, or what do you think is behind that?
People tell me that TikTok is owned by the Chinese and they use it as an instrument of cultural warfare, and that it's I purposely don't watch TikTok, but
Right.
I'm told that the anti-Semitic content is like 100 times higher
Oh
than
yeah.
normal, and so the Chinese feed their algorithms to create misinformation, disinformation, to basically try to take apart our culture, and step by step, brick by brick, and so it should be banned. We just have to distance ourselves from the Chinese and their money. We have to distance ourselves from Qatar, Iran, and its money. And we have to regain our independence again. The trouble with America is we're full of Mr. and Mrs. Nice Guys. And we assume everybody else is Mr. and
Yeah, we
Mrs.
don't know
Nice.
how to fight this on the same field
Right.
that these enemies are fighting on, and it's a very deceptive war. We don't
Yes.
really see. It's often it has like a nice face, but
Right.
yet it's subtle, it's subversive. We need to understand what we are seeing, how we are seeing it, and trust ourselves to see it, and pray. By the way,
That's right.
prayer plays a major role. If you pray, it's practical. You start to,
Right.
you start to like realize things that you're seeing that you didn't know you saw, and rethinking things in a way that's very independent. It's very important exercise.
I would take it one more step. I would say pray and box. And I don't mean physically box, I mean intellectually box. So when someone says something dumb or false narrative or Chinese and KGB fingerprints, you go, no, that's total baloney. I'm not going to listen to this. I mean, I'll listen to the baloney, but I'm going to tell you why it's baloney. And we have to fight, again, intellectually, fight back against these evil ideas.
We do, but we also should keep in mind that some of these things are implanted because we've become couch potatoes. We're receivers of information. And so we basically absorb these shibboleths that mean nothing, and we're triggered when they're challenged. So when you're dealing with that type of situation, even in yourself, but with other people, especially people who you're close to in your family, you have to approach it carefully and with love. You can't come down like a ton of bricks, or else you're just going to slam the door shut. It takes time and it takes patience to reach people, but you can do it over time. I mean, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. So it's a little note of caution there.
Right, right.
But so Kenneth, where can people get your excellent book, and what do you have coming up? You're working on a new book. Tell me about it.
Okay. Well, my book is called The Multifront War. It's available if someone goes to my website, savethewest.com, savethewest.com. It takes you right to a link to Amazon, but there's other competitors to Amazon. So all the normal bookstores that are available nowadays. And it's about 200 pages. It's easy to read. This is my third edition, so I updated it once and then a second time. So this is my third edition. And every 2 weeks, I write an article on my website, savethewest.com. So any of your listeners can go for free to my website. There's a pop-up menu. They can sign up for my articles. They get an article every 2 weeks. And over time, now that I've been writing articles for 8 years or so, I can put that together and create another book whenever I want to. And so every week I work on 10 articles at the same time. And then every week I look around and I say, oh, the people don't understand issue number 47. And I take that out of my head, put it on a piece of paper and type it into my little computer and create an article every 2 weeks.
Excellent. In a way, like also I've noticed that the podcasts, because my podcast goes on about 30 different platforms, including Apple. Apple will create a transcript, and it's incredible. I mean, you could basically turn those into books. So anyways,
Right.
Kenneth, I want to thank you very much for joining me. Let's stay in touch. SaveTheWest.com. Check that out. And of course, check out the book, The Multifront War, Defending America from Political Islam, China, Russia, Pandemics. We didn't even talk about the pandemic, but maybe another time. and
Okay.
racial strife. Kenneth, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you. Anytime you want, I'll be back.
Excellent.